Now I want to talk to you about another monastic painter. He's known as Fra Filippo Lippi. Now, Fra means brother. And he was a member of the Carmelite order in Florence, which was centered at the church of Santa Maria dei Carmine, which you'll remember that is where Masaccio and Masolino painted the Medici Chapel frescoes. Well, this is another monastic painter, but he's almost, as far as his life goes, the complete opposite of Fra Angelico. Now, Fra Angelico was devout, pious. He was a beato, or at least many people call him that. Blessed. Lippi was, well, he may have taken monastic vows, but his life was extremely secular. In fact, later on, he's living outside the monastery. And Vasari tells us that he has these uncontrollable sensual appetites, and wherever he sees a woman that he wants, he'll give anything he can to get her, to have sex with her. And, he can't always get her, so he will draw a picture and try to get over it. In fact, when I was a student, I heard this somewhat romantic story about Lippi, that he fell in love with this lovely novice, and he fathered a child on her, and the Pope released him from his vows so he could marry her and legitimize the children. Except it turns out that's not exactly what happened. I read, there is a book on Fra Filippo Lippi by Megan Holmes, and she discusses all of this literature about Lippi, and she says that this was an attempt to sort of whitewash his life story to appeal to a bourgeois morality of the 19th century editor of the Lives of the Artist. It was Milanese, and it's always the Milanese edition of Vasari's Lives that we use when we want to quote in the actual Italian. What does Vasari say? And what documents can we say about Fra Filippo Lippi? Well, Vasari says that he was a poor little orphan boy, that his mother died in childbirth for him, and his father died when he was 2 years old. And he came under the care of his aunt, but she just couldn't provide for him. And so when he was 8 years old, she gave him to the Carmelites as a child oblate. And then probably about 8 years later, when he was around 16, he makes his profession of faith as a Carmelite. Now, Vasari talks about how amorous he is. And he does talk about Lucretia Pitti, the woman on whom he fathered 2 children. Vasari mentions one, Filippino Lippi, a painter. And he has a sister, Alessandra. And according to Vasari, the Pope offered to release Filippo, the father, from his monastic vows so he could marry Pitti. But Lippi refused, because then he wouldn't be able to, well, Vasari doesn't say sleep around, but that's what he means. It would interfere with his appetites. So that's a very different and less, maybe less appealing picture of his private life. However, his art is rather wonderful. And we're going to see how his style changes. We might also point out that there are some documents, and it seems that there are two other members of the Lippi family who take their vows at the same monastery. And one is his older brother, and the other one, we're not sure of what the relationship is. And it seems that he was a priest because he had benefices. And he was the confessor, the chaplain to this, to the nunnery where he met Lucretia Pitti. So he was not in compliance with his vows of chastity. The first surviving painting that we have by Lippi, it's mentioned by Vasari, and it was discovered in a fragmentary form. As you can see, there's parts of this missing. And this fresco is in the church of, it's in Santa Maria del Carmine in Florence, and it is a fresco of the confirmation of the Carmelite rule. When a new monastic order comes into being, the Pope must review it and decide if it's going to be a legitimate order, and he must confirm the rule. So that's what we're seeing here. Actually, we're seeing a scene of monks sort of out in a landscape. And I always, look at this photograph of this fat, jolly monk just smiling at us. Now, the first painting that we have that has a date on it is the Tarquina Madonna. The Tarquina Madonna is named for the place that it is, the city of Tarquina. And so this is a Madonna and Child, and it is dated 1437. And one of the things you'll notice about this is that the forms seem to be very heavy and weighty, particularly the Christ child. I mean, he's almost grotesquely fat. He has these huge cheeks, very puffy. And in fact, the Madonna is often said to, not look elegant like a princess, more like she's of a lower or a middle class woman. The setting is a domestic interior. We see a bed in the background, and yet what is this in the foreground that Mary is seated on is a very elaborate marble throne. So there's perhaps you might think a kind of inconsistency between the domestic interior and Mary is shown as Queen of Heaven with her throne. There's some other interesting things about this painting. For one thing, you might notice that in the upper left, you can just see part of a window in the room. And through that window, there's a little landscape. It's a view for the window. And so we suspect that he may have been influenced by some Netherlandish paintings that showed a window and had come down to Italy. Now, nobody knows for sure what the first painting that had a landscape in the background or the first painting that showed a window looking out into a landscape, the first painting, the Renaissance, was. We have lost many, many paintings. But we do know that the Netherlandish artists were known for painting landscapes, and that at a later time, that is a motif that we see. So we have here heavy volumes. You'll notice that she does not have a halo. She has a diadem rather than an elaborate crown, but there's no halo. And once again, that seems, perhaps more naturalistic. No gold disc halo to interfere with us seeing the setting. The other thing you may notice is that there is a contour around the figures. Now there's a line, which we didn't really see with Masaccio. And that linearity will become stronger with the subsequent paintings, such as the San Lorenzo Annunciation. This is still in its original place in the church of San Lorenzo in Florence. And you'll remember that San Lorenzo was remodeled under the design of Brunelleschi. We think this dates about 1440, and it has a number of illusionistic elements to it. For one thing, those columns and arches are not real. They're painted. And so we have the illusion of looking through the archways and seeing what's going on behind them. And it really sets it off as a specific space. Now, one thing you may have noticed that's a little unusual for an Annunciation is there's actually 4 angels there. The angel Gabriel is kneeling right before Mary as we look through the arch on the right. And you can see that he exists in space because part of his garment and part of his wings extends out the other side behind the central pilaster or pillar there. But then there's 2 other angels who have kind of these, puffy faces, and they seem to be attending at the Annunciation. They're certainly not in the Bible. You might notice that Mary's pose is very mannered in a sense. Her whole body arcs to one side. The hip and the stomach seem to be lifted, and she has this very stylized gesture with one hand up and the other hand down. She's a very elegant creature compared to the Tarquina Madonna. She is positively elegant. She's wearing a garment with the little poofs that reminds us of a classical garment, and you can see how it clings to, for example, her leg, to parts of her body, suggesting that there's really a body there. He's actually returned to the gold disc halo here for both Mary and the angel Gabriel, who kneels in front of her. And then beyond them, using linear perspective, we see this range of buildings and an enclosed garden. And you'll remember that the enclosed garden is a symbol of the Virgin Mary. So here, little detail of the extra angels and a bit of the garden in the background. And there's more details. You see Mary and how relatively elegant she appears. Now, there's another detail that's so fascinating, which is this detail of the clear crystalline vase, which is right down there, on this little ledge at the front of the painting. And there's even a little space carved out for it to sit there. Now, once again, we look at that and we say, oh my goodness, this is Netherlandish influence. Because there are many, many Netherlandish paintings that have pictures of the Virgin Mary. It could be an Annunciation, for example, or a Madonna and Child. And they will have a clear glass vessel containing clear water. We see it in work by Jan van Eyck, and I give you a little detail from Jan van Eyck's Lucca Madonna. And you see in works by Roger van der Weyden. So this is something he may have seen from a Netherlandish painting, a Flemish painting that had been exported to Italy, where they were very popular. Okay, why such emphasis on this vessel? Does he just want to show how well he can paint it? Well, I'm sure he did, but it has a symbolic meaning. The clear glass and the clear water refer to the purity of the Virgin. And there is a medieval hymn that talks about the light shining through glass as a kind of metaphor for the Holy Spirit impregnating Mary. You know, as the light shines through the glass, but it doesn't break it, so the Virgin, still intact, remains. So this is a Marian symbol. It's also, as we said, him showing how well he can do it. It's a little trompe l'oeil, or fool the eye device. And here we see one of these more elegant Madonnas that he seems to, well, it seems to start a little bit with the San Lorenzo Madonna, but by the 50s, he's painting these delicate, beautiful Madonnas. The romantic story was that these are based on Lucretia Buti, whom he saw and wanted to paint her as the Madonna. I have no idea if there's any truth in that or not. It's a nice legend. But we do see, as you can see, a very dainty, beautiful Madonna. And you do have the Christ child here being sort of, a robust child, but not as, monstrously or fat. He just, he has some hefty baby cheeks, but he doesn't seem to be, quite grossly overweight. So Lippi is using more delicate lines. And this is very tender in a sense, where you have Mary adoring the Christ child. And the Christ child, it's just such a gentle way that he puts his hand on his mother's shoulder and is reaching out for her. And then we have this, he likes to do these little angels, this cute little angel who's just turned around and is grinning at us, a little child angel. And that draws our attention in. It does give it a little bit of humor to the solemnity of the moment. You can see that he also, is able to do very fine details, such as the transparent veil and all of the ornamentation on the chair, the edge of the chair that Mary's seated on. And then in the background, we have this kind of molding that suggests that we are looking through a window into a landscape. And so that idea of the landscape background is really opening up. Now, you also see that there are these cliffs in the background. And it has been suggested that these rocks may refer to a prophecy, a vision of Daniel, where Daniel sees a stone cut without human hands that fell from the mountain and smashed an idol with a feet of clay. And then they grew into a mountain that filled the entire earth. These rocks grew. Medieval commentators saw this verse, Daniel 2:33, as a prophecy of the virgin birth. There is a sea view, and Mary is also called the star of the sea and the port of salvation. So Lippi's Madonna is becoming more dainty. And, he also enjoys putting in these little child angels with a sort of humorous twist, you might notice that there is another angel who's helping to hold up the Christ child, but you can barely see him, just part of the face under the Christ child's arm. We now want to look at another Madonna and Child, and you'll see, it looks like the same person. He's using exactly the same type for the Madonna, this pretty, dainty figure. Now, this is a tondo, T-O-N-D-O, a tondo, which is a round painting. And there's been a number of ideas about this. Round paintings were very popular in the 15th century. And one idea is that they were associated with the deschi di parti. What is a deschi di parti? A birth tray, that when a woman gave birth, that friends, well-wishers, family members would bring her presents, and sometimes they would be fruit and flowers and things like this on a tray. And it's speculated that sometimes these paintings might even be used as trays, or that they might serve as a gift to the newborn mother. And certainly, this painting showing the Madonna and Child, and in the background the birth of the Virgin Mary, would be an appropriate subject for a deschi di parti. And then, of course, if it is a painting, if it's used to bring in, say, fruit or something, it would be then, of course, be able to be displayed on the wall. Now, we don't know that that's its purpose, but that's one idea. And there you see the charming, beautiful Madonna and the little plump baby boy Jesus. And some of the scenes going on in the background. You have St. Anne in bed, having just delivered of the Virgin Mary, who's is shown as a little baby all wrapped up in swaddling clothes. And then on the other side, we believe that these are Anna and Joachim, the Virgin's parents. And of course, there's we talked to you about the legend of Anna and Joachim when I talked to you about Giotto. And so it's suggested that they're showing the meeting at the Golden Gate, which some authors see this meeting as a kind of miraculous conception of Mary. And you might want to look at some of the well-wishers who are coming in. One with a little baby, they're carrying things. One woman is carrying something on her head. Now, look at that woman who's carrying something on her head. Haven't we seen somebody that looks like her before? Yes, and we'll see somebody that looks like her again. This image of a woman carrying something on her head and having fluttering draperies behind her legs appears in a number of 15th century paintings and sculpture. And where we've seen it before is in Ghiberti's Gates of Paradise, the scene of Jacob and Esau, when you have some maidservants gathered around, and one of the graceful maidservants is this type. I think I mentioned to you that we have a lost statue of this type by Donatello called the Dovizia. And there is a drawing by Botticelli, in several paintings by Ghirlandaio, later in the century. We see this. So presumably there was a well-known classical example, or perhaps some of the painters drew from Donatello's statue. But this figure they're trying to show movement, activity, grace, and what balance in a sense. Lippi went to Prato, and in the cathedral he painted some frescoes, including the Feast of Herod, which we see here. The Feast of Herod is going on this table that takes us back into space, and you have the floor tiles laid out like the linear perspective grid. And of course, Fra Angelico, Fra Filippo Lippi are following that tradition begun by Brunelleschi and Masaccio of knowing how to do linear perspective. In fact, it's often, well, Vasari talks about Lippi copying from Masaccio's Medici Chapel frescoes, and that he surpassed all the other copyists. And that some people said that he was the spirit of Masaccio reborn. It has also been suggested that Masaccio may have been working while the young Filippo Lippi, as living in the Carmelite monastery, would have seen him at work on the Medici Chapel, and speculation that maybe he even had some lessons or something like that. Of course, we don't know. But here we see the Feast of Herod. We see that he knows his linear perspective. We see that he knows how to show the moving figure with the fluttery drapery, which is the way that the 15th century would show a dancing figure. Think of the Salome in Donatello's statue of Donatello's relief of the Feast of Herod from the baptismal font. And so we see Salome dancing. And then we see her again really bringing in the head of John the Baptist and presenting it to her mother, Herodias. Here, let's look a little closer. There's a couple of figures who seem to be very conflicted about this. One looks like they're pushing away. The other one seems to be stopping them and looking. And this is very clever. This is really thinking in 3 dimensions. In the scene of the beheading or the execution of John the Baptist, the executioner, you see, he's already cut off John's head, and he reaches across the corner. He's trying to create the illusion, not that it's going back at the corner, but just going straight across that space and placing the head of John the Baptist on the platter, that the salver that is offered by Salome. And this, you can see, is the corner of that, on our right as we're looking at it, that is the corner of the scene showing the Feast of Herod. So we actually see Salome 3 times. These are 2 very, very similar frescoes of the Madonna, Mary, adoring the Christ child. We think they're both from the late 1450s. One is in the Uffizi Gallery. Another is in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. The other is in the Gemäldegalerie Galleria in Berlin. These pictures were painted for Lucrezia Torrabone, who was the wife of Piero de' Medici and the mother of Lorenzo the Magnificent. And one was painted for her cell at the monastery at Campidoglio in the Apennine Mountains. In other words, she could go away for a retreat and meditate in this cell. One of the interesting things about the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance is that lay people sometimes wanted to have some of the same spiritual benefits that seem to be reserved for religious or people who take monastic vows. And so we start to see the rise of things like the Book of Hours, abbreviated canonical hours. And we sometimes speculate that many of the paintings that have been painted could be painted as though they're giving the patron a vision of the holy scene, just as, say, St. Bridget of Sweden might have a vision that Mary shows her how something happened, like the Nativity. Well, okay, most of us don't have those visions, but the painter will paint one for you. And in the case of some of the people who were very devout and also wealthy, they might be able, because they were patrons of a monastery, to have their own cell at a monastery. In fact, Cosimo de' Medici has his own cell, his own room at San Marco in Florence. It's the largest room. It's much more spacious than the monks' cells. And it has an Adoration of the Magi painted on it. This one refers to the Camaldolites, this monastic order, as their theme. Now, we said one was for her cell in the monastery or that she could go to in the Apennines. The other was painted for the Medici Chapel in the Medici Palace, and they now have a reproduction in place. Hart believes that the iconography here is influenced by Saint Antonine or Antonius of Florence, who uses the Camaldolites as a theme. They are penitent. They spend their life in meditation in what he calls the little garden of the soul. So the garden, the Hortus Conclusus, which represents Mary's virginity, could also represent the soul as a garden. Now, it's not really a nativity scene. You don't see the ox, the ass, Joseph, midwives, anything else at the nativity, but we do see the Adoration of the Magi in the type that was popularized by St. Bridget of Sweden, the child lying naked and shining on the ground. Up above the child, there is a representation of God the Father. There is the Medici Chapel and the Medici Palace, and the original location of the Adoration of the Child in Berlin. And you can see there's God the Father, foreshortened a bit, with the dove of the Holy Spirit, very foreshortened, right below him. And then if you look down, you see God the Son, the Christ child on the ground. So you do see a vertical trinity here. Now, we also see the young John the Baptist and a monk praying in the midst of this forest. And some of the trees have been hewn down. There's John the Baptist, and there's the monk, and the Trinity, the God the Father and God the Holy Spirit as the dove, two members of the Trinity. And on this tree trunk, that's, as you can see, the branches have been cut off, there is an inscription. Fra Filippo Lippi's name is there. And it is, it's on an axe handle, as though it has been cutting down the tree. This is perhaps a biblical reference to Matthew 3, verse 10, when John the Baptist says, "And now also the axe is laid to the root of the trees. Therefore every tree which bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down." Make that into a contemporary reference to the Camaldolite order. Now, I should spell that for you, shouldn't I? Camaldolite. Because these monks go off and live in the forest. They don't have a monastery with the cells all together. Each one of them has a separate hut. They have a little garden plot where they can raise their own food. And they had to hew out some of the trees. They had to clean out the space to make a garden space. Although I would point out that in this picture, we're not seeing vegetables growing, we're seeing flowers. And you can see, for example, lilies represent reference to the purity of the Virgin. Now, we saw how Lippi developed from painting heavy, voluminous, even maybe puffy figures. And as his style goes on, the figures become more slender. He has more control over perspective and space. And his style actually becomes more linear, which is a characteristic that continues with other painters, notably his son, Filippo Lippi, who is a student of Botticelli, one of the most linear painters at all.